We're just waiting for the live stream to get started. All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here, joining us for Freeland Film Festival, both people watching virtually online and watching this incredible film that we just watched in person at the Foreign Correspondence Club of Thailand. We're really lucky today to have a conversation about the film with director Elizabeth Unger and journalist Laurel Chor, who also happen to be my fellow National Geographic explorers and friends. So thank you so much for joining us. We all really loved watching the film here, and it's a real honor to be able to screen the film here. It's an award-winning film, and it's great to be able to watch it and have you guys here with us to discuss it and talk to us more about the filmmaking process and all the messages that it conveys. So thank you for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Molly.
Nice to see you both. So I know that at the beginning of the filmmaking process, I heard a little bit from you guys about how it got started, but I would love to ask you if you could share with the audience a little bit how this idea came about, how you discovered this story and decided to make a film about it, and decided to work together on it. I think it's a really interesting way that you work together for this story. So maybe you can share a little of how it started out and how you started working together.
Sure. Basically, when I was 19, I had volunteered at a wildlife refuge in Bolivia. And that experience just led me to ask some questions about wildlife trafficking in general in the region. At the time, I didn't see too many stories about wildlife trafficking in Latin America. A lot of the media was focused on Africa with the poaching of elephants and rhinos. So when I heard years later in 2015 that there was this new trade in jaguar parts that was being sourced from the Bolivian rainforest, I knew that it was a big story. I have a degree in biology, and I knew in the conservation world, no one was really talking about that at the time, back in 2015. I was eventually introduced to Marcos Luciano, who was the director of Midday National Park, and he was investigating the trade, and I knew that there was a story that should be followed there. However, I really deeply wanted to see a Chinese point of view in a film like this. I had never really seen one that went in depth into the Chinese point of view, into why these trades exist in the first place. So with Laurel, who I knew from National Geographic already, as we're both grantees, same as Molly, I approached her and said, hey, I have this story on my hands. Would you be interested in developing it with me? And so Laurel is actually an executive producer on the project and a protagonist in the film. So over the last few years, Laurel began to investigate the jaguar trade from the Asia side. And that's how our story kind of came together. It took 6 long years to make this project.
And Laurel, how did you decide that you were interested in being part of the project?
Yeah, well, I had done other work on different wildlife trade issues. I had been involved with campaigns to reduce demand for shark's fin in Hong Kong. I'd been involved in campaigns on ivory. I had actually investigated the trade in ivory before. So it was a sort of natural continuation of the things I'd been interested in before. Being from Hong Kong, which is the epicenter of so many different wildlife trades, I'd always been really frustrated that all this was happening right under my nose. And equally frustrated at how wrong a lot of international conservation organizations would get it. A lot of the discourse I would hear just seemed to totally miss the mark. Like, one thing I still hear quite often about shark's fin is about how it doesn't taste like anything. And, arguments like that just don't work. To have someone else tell you what your food tastes like is not the right approach. So when Liz approached me, of course, the story is really interesting, but also I really loved how Liz was so open about, doing this story differently. I mean, she had really, just a really different approach to what could have been a really typical wildlife crime story. And I loved that Liz was really willing to try to put this other perspective forward. No one ever really talks about consumers and why they consume and what their motivations are, and it often becomes a two-dimensional narrative about ignorant consumers or evil consumers or barbaric consumers. So trying to bring more nuance and depth to that was something I was really excited about working with Liz on.
Yeah, that's absolutely. I think that's unique about the way that you told this story, having that perspective in a genre that does typically villainize people from China and kind of the culture. And I think that you guys did a really good job of telling a more balanced and kind of whole picture story about what's going on, and that makes this much more of a valuable story, I think, especially in actually creating impact and actually thinking about, what is the mentality behind this rather than just judging it from maybe a Western perspective as many stories do. So very good job on that. I was really happy to see that in the film, and I think you guys did an amazing job. So on that note, Laurel, how did it feel for you to bring in these personal sides of the story, like your own family? When I was watching that, I was like, that's bold and brave of you to do that, and I wonder how it felt.
Yeah, great question. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, it was quite, I think at the beginning, quite uncomfortable for me because, I'm a journalist, so it's not usually the story. And even when I'm on camera, I'm kind of, a means to a story, but here it's kind of laying open my life and my family. And I'm really grateful to Liz because, she knew just how vulnerable I had to be for this. And she was always really, really thoughtful and always made sure that I knew that she had my, best interests at heart and wouldn't want to do anything that might, turn out badly. Because it is, it is a really vulnerable position to be in it. And my parents say crazy things. and I mean, I'm sure most people listening here could probably empathize with not wanting your conversations with your parents aired in public. So it was scary. But at the same time, I saw the value, and I think sometimes in conservation or even journalism, I think for a lot of us who maybe come from non-Western countries but work in Western contexts, we often have to maybe code switch or like hide certain parts of ourselves to be palatable or work in Western situations. And I think it's unfortunate we feel the need to, of course I understand why, but I think, if we're able to be more open and actually use the ways in which we understand different worlds and actually help to bridge those worlds, I think that could be really valuable. And that's why, trusting Liz to handle this very delicate story was really important. And I'm so glad I worked with her on that.
I just want to jump in and say I'm very, very grateful to Laurel to letting us document some of these very intimate moments. And just from a filmmaking perspective, Laurel gave us strong notes that we followed, just like our other executive producers, where I think it's really important to be mindful and give people real positions of power on a project whose lives you're documenting, because it's just, there on screen. So again, really grateful to Laurel to trusting our team with this story, and also a message for any other filmmaker out there to really, really listen to your subjects and take their notes into account when making something like this.
Absolutely. That's very important. And it has to happen more in the film world. I think it doesn't happen enough. So I was really glad to see that between the two of you. And I also noticed that you were able to gain the trust of other people in the story, and able to film some pretty sensitive things going on. And I wondered how you kind of gained the trust of some of these people to allow you to film with them and to include them in the story. And I know that it can be really difficult to get access to that kind of, to the side of the story of that you were able to show. So I just wonder how you were able to do that and navigate those relationships and do it as respectfully as you have.
I think through the Bolivia side with Marcos, we were introduced by someone else in the Bolivian government who basically said, hey, Marcos is someone who's actively investigating the Jaguar trade. He might be interested in being involved. So when I actually met him through my Bolivian field producer, he basically said, hey, if you want to showcase this issue and make sure that people know what Madidi is, and we can get more tourism to Madidi or more regulations or protections for Madidi, I'm on board. Just protecting that park is his life's work. So through the film, I told him, hey, by showing you and your love for the park and showing this issue inside the park, it seems very focused, hyper-focused on this issue, but I guarantee you people around the world will love this park because they'll love you and they'll love your passion for saving this place. So he was able to trust our team through that. And then anyone else that you see with him in the film, I mean, some of the most elusive kind of gets we had was kind of the opening and ending of the film where you see that protection ceremony with a shaman. That's actually Marcos's stepfather, who's one of the most revered shamans in Bolivia. It was the first and only time he's ever been filmed doing anything like that. And that was purely out of the trust that Marcos had with our team, and we were able to gain access to that. And that was really a stunning moment for me that we were able to film something like that out there. And then throughout the investigation, we just, it took years of relationships with the Bolivian government, with the park rangers, with the people, indigenous communities on the ground. It took a very long time. I would say we did not parachute in and out of this one. Our team spent about 3 years off and on coming into Bolivia to develop that. And on Laurel's side, we really wouldn't have been able to get into anywhere without her connections and, the trust that she had with her family and their contacts out there.
Fantastic. So talking about impact and how you, sounds like you explained, the type of impact you were trying to create through the film. How does a film like this perpetuate impact? Like, how can you really create change and impact through a film like this? And where are you sharing it? How are you getting this message to people?
I'll begin. Our impact campaign, actually, first, let me back up. For any wildlife crime films you may have seen over the last decade, you might have seen something at the end of them. It says, if you want to help support this cause, text this code to this number or go to our website and donate. I personally don't think that there's a huge amount of impact that's generated from that type of methodology at the end of films. I think very few people actually text or go. So for this film, I really want to avoid that. And I'd rather have more purposeful face-to-face, or as much in the world of COVID right now, as many activities as possible to get people engaged from North America all the way through Latin America and Asia. We want to do a wide sweeping impact campaign that lasts a year or two. So in order to do that, we are currently fundraising to get that going. We actually got into something called FIFDH Impact Days in Geneva. Laurel, I'm actually I was going to tell you about this because it was pretty recent, which is massive. It's a convention I've been trying to get into for a few years. And over 100 projects were submitted. We were one of 16 that got in. And essentially, that convention connects you with major philanthropies, major institutions that are able to bankroll impact campaigns. So that's going to happen in March. And we're creating basically a plan. How are we going to roll out this impact campaign? And that's really going to come from proper impact producers that are based in Latin America and Asia that we're going to be working with. And as we got our impact campaign going, we're going to be using the film as kind of like a centerpiece and a massive campaign in order to do screenings, grassroots all the way up to the highest decision makers in government. So that's our plan. And I know that we're hoping to work with Laurel on the impact side, because I think she's so articulate and such an amazing person. She would be just perfect to speak with a variety of audiences all over, and inspire them to make a change. And when we say make a change, it really depends on what audience you're speaking to. North American audiences in the US, it's going to be a different ask for them than it is going to be for policymakers in Latin America, or traditional Chinese medicine practitioners in Asia. So it's kind of like a big organism, lots of different puzzle pieces that we'll put together in order to have wide sweeping impact.
Yeah. I mean, Liz obviously has a very clear and solid and ambitious plan, which I have no doubt she will execute. But for me personally, I mean, even doing this film has made me reflect a lot on these issues. And I'm actually currently doing a master's in biodiversity and conservation. And my dissertation is sort of looking at these issues, how different perceptions of an animal or of an environmental problem come into conflict, and how are we supposed to navigate these conflicts, and what are the implications for conservation and social justice. And those are the conversations, I think, in a much more abstract way. So I think those are the conversations I'm hoping to spark, which is, I think, nowadays with so many environmental crises or crises of any kind, really, we often fall into the trap of blaming other people for problems, of othering people, and kind of absolving ourselves of responsibility. And I think that's really dangerous on so many levels. And I think if we're really going to find a solution, we're all going to have to come to terms with how we're all complicit of really the same kinds of crimes. Wildlife trade is one issue, but fish, like eating fish, is a type of wildlife trade, but it's not framed that way for basically business economic reasons, right? So there's a lot of ways in which we're all complicit in our daily actions, but we're not really being forced to confront in the same ways we're asking other people to confront for practices that we don't partake in. So those are the kind of conversations I hope this film can help open up.
I think it will open up those types of conversations, and you both have a really strong plan, and it sounds fantastic. Good luck. It's ambitious, and I know you're gonna do it. So that's always good to hear from someone who is actually capable of accomplishing something this ambitious. That's fantastic. I feel like that's part of filmmaking for impact, right? Is actually how to get it out there, and afterwards how to let that message create impact and start conversations like that. So well done. Speaking of conversations, I want to ask for a couple questions from the audience now. I saw a couple. Steve?
Sure. Thank you for making the film and letting us share it with others. I have a comment, some feedback for Liz, and then a question for Laurel. The comment back to Liz is, first, thank you. I think a very important audience here are the people that you also filmed, the frontline protectors. And I think no matter how many people get to see this and how many awards it gets, and I hope it gets lots of them so lots of people are attracted to it, just showing it back to those rangers and other people working on this is important. And you did that with Freeland with us in Brazil a month or so back in a private showing to investigators from different range and transit countries in South America working on jaguar trafficking. And I can tell you, having talked to them, that they felt that was very informative and very motivating. So I think that's really an important thing. I'm saying it to you, but also filmmakers in general. to remember that audience. Obviously, you did a film that was not a hit and run. You developed a relationship, as you said, so I think that's reflected in the quality, but more of that is great. And, you know,
Small commercial break, yes, okay, switching
Yeah,
microphones,
but more-
and we're back,
Okay.
yes.
And also, given the fact, as you demonstrate in the film, there's a mixing of big cat trade for bones. Something we work on also. We see a lot of, you know, people who are trading tiger bones, importing lion bones, and so it was no surprise for us to see jaguar trafficking mixed in there. But anyway, I think we should be showing this to different audiences in different countries, because big cat trafficking is happening all over the place. So thank you. For Laurel, demand reduction. I know you work on investigations and lots of other things, but I was intrigued by the conversations you had with your family, and then your comments toward the end, you know, in response to that anti-Chinese sentiment, you know, that how it brings the walls down and you're not going to get anywhere. I'm just wondering what you specifically do propose. And, you know, a few years back, the United States crushed 6 tons of ivory out in Colorado as a demonstration of, you know, doing demand reduction. The Chinese, not too long later, crushed 6.2 tons. You know, there was this like sort of competition going on. I'm just wondering if, you know, how much of it is, you know, shame, how much of it is competition, how much of it is spotlighting a potential champion. Noting that under COVID, I would argue the Chinese have done more to come down on the wildlife trade than any country in the world. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and it's a big question in my research now. And I think what is perhaps most surprising is that there is almost no research on. There's very little evidence-based demand reduction interventions out there. A lot of it is just basically based on, you know, Western conservation organizations feeling like if I just tell them what to do, or, you know, obviously I'm simplifying and things are better now, but, you know, if I just tell them what to do, if I just show, you know, convince them that what they're doing is stupid and unscientific, then surely they'll see the light. And I think we have a lot of examples of campaigns that are maybe not what you should do. You know, things that have been proven to be ineffective are, for example, rhino horn campaigns that compare eating rhino horn to biting your nails, you know, and that's a trope I see repeated in the media a lot. Things like that, where, you know, it's kind of patronizing and condescending, and it's almost surprising to me that the people behind those campaigns don't see that. So, you know, I don't have any necessarily very solid evidence-based suggestions, but one thing that I've found through my own research now, which is actually looking at the trade in manta ray and devil ray gill plates for Chinese medicine, is, you know, I think there is now a lot of distrust of environmental organizations amongst target audiences, I think, because, you know, they keep being told by the same people and over that what they do is wrong, and they don't see that as fair, or they don't necessarily, you know, see how that's true. You know, what they're consuming is still available, so how can it possibly, and they've been consuming it for generations, so how can that possibly be true? And I think, you know, realizing, almost being more honest in a way, like, for example, with manta rays, a lot of the arguments used is, you know, any take is unsustainable because of their slow reproductive cycles, that they only produce a pup every year or two, and that's why you should stop consuming manta rays. But when you talk to manta ray conservationists and scientists, really they want, I mean, the real reason is because they think they're beautiful, amazing, intelligent creatures. And I think if we're actually more honest about that and had people see that, then that might be more convincing than, you know, we don't actually have much data on this, on the populations, but we think this is true, therefore you should stop eating it. But how about just be honest and say, hey, like, these are really beautiful creatures, and I know that you relate to animals too, because you have pet dogs or whatever, and this is a really cruel practice. Just yesterday, I spoke to a woman who she's sort of a cooking influencer, and she has actually used gill plates in her cooking shows. And she told me she had actually stopped consuming shark's fin and promoting shark's fin, and refuses to source it for clients because she saw how cruel that shark finning was. And to her, that was even more important than environmental issues. She saw how cruel it was. She has a pet dog. She keeps fish in a fish tank. So I think there's just, if you're just more honest and really reached out to and just said, you know, we need to protect nature because it's beautiful and sacred and important, rather than, I don't quite like the ecosystem services argument. Anyway, I'm going off on a very long tangent now. So it's a big question, and I'm hoping to help find answers, and I hope we keep asking those questions.
Absolutely. Luis, did you have a question? Oh,
no, it's on. Well, congratulations for the film. It was excellent, and I really enjoyed it. And something that really shook me was during the raid, when we see the rangers on like this boat trying to like get these guys who are probably traffickers. It was really sad to understand that like they actually, I don't know what is, I mean, my question is like, what is the jurisdiction for like the park rangers in Bolivia? Because I mean, I know like in Mexico where I'm from, like you know, they have like them machetes and slingshots, and other places like Assam in India, in Kaziranga, they have the right to shoot. But you know, like I was really upset when I see these guys trying to do their job, and obviously they cannot confront someone who is armed because they are not armed. And like on that note, what do you think about what is your standpoint about like arming the park rangers in Bolivia and sort of militarizing the national park guards?
Thanks for that question. So for that scene, I was actually down there shooting that myself, and was having a really interesting time listening to the Rangers and the Navy members that were on board. So anytime the Rangers go out and they get a tip that people are inside the park, they have to request for one or two Navy members. The Bolivia does have a Navy. To get onto their boat with them, who are armed. But what's really interesting about that is while the Bolivian park rangers do not have any sort of firearms at all, I overheard a conversation between Marcos and one of those Navy members who did have a gun, and he asked, hey, if we're being shot at, can you return fire? And the Navy member said, no, in Bolivia, we can't even return. It's only if you get hit or wounded in some way, you're able to have kind of like a mirrored response. So if someone stabs you, you're able to defend yourself and stab them back. So the Rangers kind of thought it was hilarious that even though they had people who had weapons on board as per protocol, they still were not really able to defend themselves. Now, that doesn't mean that the traffickers, the poachers on that other boat know that. They probably don't. They just know that someone has a gun on board and they'd be less likely to shoot at the Rangers, right? But to be honest with you, the Bolivian park rangers in Medellin National Park, which is one of the best funded parks in Bolivia, are still severely under-resourced. I mean, they didn't even have radios for a long time. They weren't even able to call back to a station easily for help. So when they're out there, they're really out there alone. The idea of militarizing the park rangers is complicated. I mean, in Africa, you have militarized park rangers because they deal with being shot at every day. In Bolivia, those types of boat chases happen very rarely, maybe a couple times a year. And they just haven't needed from what they've told me, they have not needed to use guns in the field very often. Something that Marco said that resonated with me is that in the park, the only weapon that they have is their words. and they're able to diffuse a situation out there by just speaking with the people. And that's what they've been trained to do. They're very, very good in conversations and their dialogue, learning how to get out of those situations with just kind of their wits. So while I would prefer them to have a line of defense with a weapon, you just have no idea how that can escalate a situation unnecessarily. So it's a tough question for me to answer.
Well, it's definitely a situation that doesn't have a clear answer in a lot of places. So, but I think that was a really good answer, because yeah, it's not simple. There's a lot of things to think about. And that's really interesting what you said about the way that they talk to people, because you see a little bit of that in the way that they interact with people there. And I thought they did that really well, and it was interesting to watch. So yeah, well, thank you so much for the discussion. And I wish we could keep on asking you more questions, because there's so much interesting stuff to talk about. But I think we should let you go. So thank you so much for joining us and sharing with us.
Thank you so much for having us.
We've known Molly for years, Laurel and I, through National Geographic. So thank you so much for having us, Molly. We really appreciate it. So grateful to be a part of this screening for you guys. And please feel free to email us or reach out if you have any additional questions. We just want to make sure that your questions are heard, and they mean a lot to us. So thank you again.
Thank you. Good to see you, Molly.
Good to see you both. Thank you for being here. And for anyone watching online, not this particular film, this one we only have in person, but we have 18 films online on our platform. So please feel free to check them out. And you can go to the Freeland website, freeland.org, to get your passes to watch those 18 films online. And we also have lots more screenings coming up tomorrow here at the Foreign Correspondents Club, so please join us. Thank you for watching online and here in person, and have a good night. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.